The widespread protests in the US shone a light on how Indigenous Australians are treated by police. 423 Indigenous Australians have died in custody in Australia since 1991. And just yesterday, that video emerged of the Aboriginal teenager being forced to the ground during an arrest. For more, I'm joined by Martin Hodgson, who's a senior advocate at the Foreign Prisoner Support Service. Thank you so much for your time, Martin Hodgson. What parallels do you draw between Indigenous deaths in custody and treatment by police with what's happening in the US?
Well, there certainly are parallels. Both communities are targeted far too frequently, but I think we're spending far too much time on America and not enough time on what's happening in our own backyard. It should not take a tragic death in the United States for people to care about what's happening to Aboriginal people every single day.
And why do you think that is? I know that you've highlighted the fact that in the United States, a lot of these incidents happen in cities, that there are people around to film the incidents, whereas in Australia, a lot of the time it happens in rural or regional or remote areas where it's simply not caught on camera.
Yeah, and that's right. I think we've documented hundreds of cases of violent assaults by police. We know there's been 432 deaths in custody. And they're not all caught on camera, but we know they occur. And we also know that police investigating police has about as much use as the Catholic Church investigating the Catholic Church. It is unacceptable.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because the barrister Joshua Creamer, who worked on the Palm Island class action today, he wrote a piece for Indigenous X where he called for an independent investigative body to examine a death in custody rather than internal police reviews. How would that work?
Well, I think we need Aboriginal elders to be given the power to sit both on inquests after the fact and sit on panels that are investigative before the fact or after there's been common assaults like we've seen in Sydney. We also need to see lawyers acting for the families, lawyers acting for the victims, sitting on these panels. It's unacceptable that the victims are totally excluded from the process and that the police are investigating themselves. We have the expertise in this country. We have elders who are respected and trusted by their community, absolutely, to follow through on these issues. And Aboriginal people need to be empowered to be able to take this action.
Well, Alan Clark, the journalist, he put out a statement last night. He's worked at the ABC amongst other media organisations, and he was quite critical of the media's role in its coverage of Indigenous affairs. He wrote that how can we ever really win or be seen and have agency in a judicial system that never included us from the beginning? It's a system set up to allow Aboriginal people to be murdered with little consequence. Does that go to the heart of how Indigenous people feel?
Yeah, look, I know Alan and I agree with him 100%. I think Alan's looked at cases where Aboriginal people have been killed and no one has ever been held accountable. Alan's looked at a case involving a child. We've seen a child assaulted in Sydney by police. Just up the road from Sydney 2 years ago, Rebecca Ma was killed in a police station who then imitated a chimpanzee as she lay dying on the floor. Where is the media just driving a couple of hours up the road to confront these police officers? Why are they not being charged if a mother of four can be killed in the middle of the night and the inquest into her death found that she had committed no crime? I thought we'd abolished the death penalty in Australia, but clearly for Aboriginal people we have not. And if people wonder why there's outrage, that's why. Joyce Clark, Rebecca Ma, Tanya Day, women, mothers murdered by the police and there are no consequences. How is that acceptable?
Okay, so what needs to change?
Well, we need, as it's been raised today, we need these investigations that don't involve the police. We need the police to be charged, not just with deaths in custody, but with all assaults. What we witnessed against the young man in Sydney was an assault. That is a crime. He didn't have a bad day. He committed a crime. He must be charged. We must have less of the media focusing on what's happening overseas and more of the media focusing on what's happening in our own backyard. We must hear from more Aboriginal experts who deal with this every single day. It's no good to roll out a few celebrities and try and make everyone feel better, because I've spoken to hundreds of mothers in the last 6 months, women I work with who have young black children who are scared their kids will not come home. And it's not because of any fear of anyone else, but the people who are supposed to protect and serve our community. That's not acceptable. The Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody 30 years ago was damning. Those recommendations have not been enacted. I would like the media to ask all our politicians when they are going to enact every single one of those recommendations. And I would like the police to be asked why they arrest Aboriginal people and kill them when they have not even committed a crime. Mothers murdered. Joyce Clark, Rebecca Marr, Tanya Day, they're dead. They're not coming home and they did nothing wrong. We can't have weak conversations about this anymore. We can't wait till it happens again. It's not acceptable.
Martin Hodgson, thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you so much.